will shall be the whole of the law. I thought I'd just start off with the Thelemic greeting this morning. I'll end up with it too, I bet. Anyway, it's Thursday, and we're finishing up my 2005 article in Fate magazine, and it's called 666 What's in a Number. Now, if you didn't hear yesterday's part one of this, just to briefly remind you that these are articles. I've got a few more issues that I've contributed to. Uh, and it was meant for an audience of people who might be mildly interested in occult subjects, but they're interested in all sorts of subjects, and including for since the 1940s, I think, with Fate magazine, the UFO phenomena and things like that. So I was writing with the ear of that more generalized sort of white bread audience, rather than the way I write for an audience of esoterically minded people. So if it sounds like I'm making broad generalizations and things like that, I am. So anyway, in yesterday's section, talked a lot about where the paranoia of the number 666 came from, specifically the book of the Revelation of John, and that over the years, people have been accusing great world leaders and tyrants and potential tyrants and political adversaries by saying they're this Antichrist 666 figure that's supposed to come at the end of the millennial age. But I mentioned that none of the people that were accused, Napoleon and Dwight Eisenhower and Jimmy Carter and things like that, none of them ever actually declared that they were the B666, but there was somebody that did, somebody in the 20th century. So I'm going to back up just a paragraph or two here to get us going this morning. There was, however, one man in the not too distant past who proudly claimed the title. His name was Aleister Crowley, and during his lifetime the newspapers called him the wickedest man in the world. Chances are, if you've heard anything about Aleister Crowley, it probably wasn't very good. During his lifetime and for many years after his death, his reputation has been that of a perfectly nasty man, a black magician. Now, admittedly, for Victorian England, he was a pretty wild character. If he were alive today, however, I'm afraid he would not be considered very frightening at all. In fact, in the last few years, several excellent and very well-researched biographies of Crowley have been published that have dispelled many of the untrue rumors and false accusations, including some very compelling and remarkably unevil reasons why he would claim the title of the Beast 666. Now that's where we'll pick it up today. And I pause to recommend the biography, Père du Rabot, by Dr. Richard Kaczynski, who's a dear friend of mine and a lodge brother. It's the most scholarly, most complete biography of Crowley ever written, and it may be many, many, many years for a superior biography to, if ever, to surface. So if you're interested in the flat out biographical imperial evidence biography of Aleister Crowley, Perdurabo, by Richard Kaczynski. But I'll pick up this article here. I digress, sorry. World's Wickedest Man. Paradoxes define the life and careers of Edward Alexander Crowley, or Aleister Crowley, 1875 through 1947. He was a very strange man who often behaved like a cad and a scoundrel. Notorious as he was, however, he was never charged with or arrested for or convicted of any crime whatsoever. Apparently, his greatest crime was that of poor judgment. He believed that any publicity was good publicity, and he happily cultivated a public reputation for being a black magician. He thought everyone would get the joke. Now, I pause to say that everything he did was not a joke. However, the tinkering with his own reputation and his tantalizing use of the English language to talk about secret magical things in a sensationalist way, without him thinking that hardly anybody was going to see through what he was doing, really did get him in trouble. So I'll just give you one example. I'm going to digress. In dealing with one of the things that haunt his reputation the most was his statement in Magic and Theory and Practice, when he talked about a chapter called The Bloody Sacrifice. Okay? Now, the entire chapter of The Bloody Sacrifice dealt with the subject of sex magic, okay, and the use of sexual yogic techniques, tantra yoga that is as wholesome and as normal in the East as anything, and the practice of the use of the force of ecstasy and things like. Okay, it's really high level magic. But because you could not talk about sexual matters in the years that he was writing this, as a matter of fact, even certain medical books were banned that dealt with anything that had to do with sex. So Crowley could get his books seized, burned officially by government officials in many countries if he talked too frankly about things that Wayne Dyer talks about on PBS, okay? But in those days, nobody stopped to understand what was going on enough with the subtleties of these higher exercises of yogic disciplines and such, to pause to understand what Crowley was saying. And if he tried to say it outright, he would never get anything published. Oddly enough, what you could talk about, and what you could just write to your heart's content about, is human sacrifice and bloody rituals, and you could talk about that. You wouldn't get your books banned for doing that. So in this entire section of Magic and Theory and Practice, or Book 4, Part 3, Crowley called the bloody sacrifice. And if you know kind of what he's talking about, it's brilliant. It's wonderful. And in places, it's hysterically funny because you can tell that he's trying to communicate certain things, including very specific uh, technical matters, in such a way that it is couched in this allegorical talk. Okay, and in one of those, uh, instead of using the word uh, ecstasy or orgasm, he used the word death, meaning that it's the annihilation of normal waking consciousness into the infinite vibratory frequency of that ecstasy does. Okay, so we call that death, and the male and female sexual bodily fluids and things like that, he might call blood. And if one of these exercises was not did not result, and whose intention was not to result in actual pregnancy of a person, then that he called that a child sacrifice. Okay, so any form of birth control, any masturbation, anything like that, that's a child sacrifice. And so in this chapter of the bloody sacrifice, in a footnote, he confessed to performing this sacrifice of the male child. He said, my diaries show that I did this 120 times one year. Everybody that knew anything about this stuff just thought that was incredibly funny. Okay, not only that, but it was very informative and just fit right in with everything else. But if you didn't have that key, you would think that he sometimes sacrificed and ate 120 babies one year. And you still hear people, Christian and evangelicals on television, say he confessed to doing that. Okay, but he didn't. And it was perfectly, in this day and age of spiritual exploration and spiritual development and the understanding of Eastern mysticism and magical practices, it was not even X-rated. It was just like PG-13 stuff, okay? So, but I digress. Be that as it may, he led a quiet life. Among other distinctions, he was a world-class mountaineer, chess master, painter, poet, sportsman, novelist, literary critic, and theatrical producer. As a ghostwriter for Evangeline Adams, get this, astrology people, as ghostwriter for Evangeline Adams, he introduced astrology to the modern world by writing the two most popular books on the subject ever penned. Astrology, Your Place in the Sun, 1927, and Astrology, Your Place Among the Stars, 1920. 1930. One of the most astonishing roles Crowley played on the stage of world events was that of secret agent. At a moment in history when the United States was seriously considering entering World War I on Germany's side, Crowley, working undercover for British intelligence, secured a job writing for an English-language German propaganda newspaper in New York City. There he wrote a series of outrageous and insanely inflammatory editorials that hailed Kaiser Wilhelm as the new Jesus Christ, advocated unrestricted submarine warfare against all of the world's civilian shipping, and boasted it was God's will that Germany rule the world. These wild statements did not reflect Germany's foreign policy. But the citizens of the United States did not know that. In short order, Crowley's editorials were being quoted by U.S. senators and congressmen who used them as evidence that Germany was a nation gone mad. The U.S. finally joined the conflict on England's side, largely due to Crowley's ingenious disinformation campaign. He put QAnon to shame, and he did it in order to bring his beloved England, to save his beloved England from annihilation and bring the United States into World War I. Short digression. Check out a book called Aleister Crowley, Secret Agent 666 by Spence, the same author who wrote the classic novel about England's first great spy or secret agent, Sidney Riley, which was made into the movie or the series Riley, Ace of Spies. And Crowley and Sidney Riley, for a number of consecutive years, lived in the same cities in Europe, going back and forth, sort of manipulating behind the scenes the events that would eventually unfold and be relative to the execution of World War I. At the request of his friend, Naval Intelligence Officer Ian Fleming, creator of James Bond 007, Crowley provided Winston Churchill with viable insights into the superstitious mindset of the leaders of Hitler's Third Reich during the Second World War. He suggested that Churchill exploit, and it is said, okay, he suggested that Churchill exploit the Nazis' magical paranoia by being photographed as much as possible, giving the two-fingered V for victory gesture, a powerful symbol of destruction and annihilation. That's the sign of Apophis and Typhon, okay? It's like the stick man, Apophis and Typhon. A powerful symbol of destruction and annihilation that, according to magical tradition, is capable of defeating the perverted, broken solar energies represented by the Nazis' swastika. Crowley's adventures and achievements, more than any dozen men of ambition and genius could hope to garner in a lifetime, are dwarfed by his monumental exploits of spiritual self-discovery. His visionary and mystical writings and his efforts to bring together the spiritual systems of the East and the West make him one of the most fascinating cultural and religious figures of the 20th century. Now, under the heading, Crowley, Reborn, Frequently. Crowley's reputation did not die with him in 1947. His mystique continues to such a degree that today he's the favorite past life of many individuals who are, shall we say, unbalanced. Over the years, I've met quite a few individuals who have claimed with grim-faced conviction to be Aleister Crowley reborn. But by the late 1970s, I had logged so many encounters with Aleister Crowley number twos that I was contacted by famed occultist Israel Regardie, who suggested he and I pool our letters and anecdotes and publish them in a book titled Lieber Nuts. My favorite case was a gentleman in Southern California who self-published a spiral-bound book supporting his claims. Regardie forwarded me his information and suggested I go to the book launching party at the man's home to investigate. I thought it might be fun, so I went. This incarnation was a pleasant enough fellow in his mid-20s with a thick, dark beard that nearly obscured his entire face. His book displayed his own photographs alongside one taken of Crowley in his late 20s. Crowley's photo, however, had been altered by the addition of a thick black beard drawn in crayon, which obscured his face so much that the images of the two men did indeed look very much alike. I resisted the temptation to comment that both pictures also look very much like Che Guevara. When I revealed that I was somewhat knowledgeable about the life of Aleister Crowley, the dear man became so excited. With poignant sincerity, he confessed, "I don't really have any memories of my life with Aleister Crowley, but if you could be kind enough to tell me things about his life, I'm sure I'll be happy to remember." Unquote. Let's return to Crowley himself, Crowley, the youthful rebel, and try to see why he identified so passionately with the Beast 666. Crowley's father was a lay preacher of the Plymouth Brethren, a fundamentalist Protestant sect. His mother was also a devout, Crowley says fanatical, member of the church. Together they did their best to raise their son within the strict tenets of the faith. Quick digression here. Plymouth Brethren were part of the Darbyite faith. Now, what we know today, or think of today, as the doctrines and the spiritual worldview of evangelical, born-again Christian waiting for the rapture, that started with the Darbyite Plymouth Brethren sect. In other words, the Protestant Christianity that is irritatingly dominant today, even as a political force, is only less than 200 years old. The idea of the interpretation of Revelation and things like that is only a couple hundred years old and goes back to the Darbyite sect. Okay, now it's more popular than Catholicism in many Latin American countries even. Okay, I digress. However, young Crowley was a mischievous and headstrong lad, and his mother equated his behavior to the rebelliousness of the devil himself. In moments of aggravation, she called him the Beast 666. He loved the idea. As he grew up, he delighted in identifying with the name and number as representative of all things joyously opposed to the spiritual, intellectual, and emotional and sexual restrictions that he believed enslaved the human soul. As a young man just beginning his study of Hebrew and Christian mysticism, Crowley discovered that the number 666, rather than being a number associated with evil, was especially sacred to the life-giving powers of the sun. It was also identified with the heart chakra, or the psychic center, Anahata chakra, in the human body. Also, in other traditions, it's called the Christ center. To understand why 666 is a magic number of the sun, we must turn to the sacred teachings of the Hebrew Kabbalah, where it is taught that the sphere of the sun is the sixth emanation from the pure essence of Godhead. To express this concept mathematically, something Kabbalists love to do, a square composed of 36 squares, 6 by 6. The numbers 1 to 36 are then arranged in a balanced way so that every row, every column add to the same number. That number is 111. And the sum of all the squares is 666. Under the heading Little Sunshine. Crowley tried to explain this in court. Oh, I wish we could have a recording of this. Crowley tried to explain this in court when he testified in a 1934 lawsuit. He was asked, "Do you take to yourself the designation of the beast 666? Yes. Do you call yourself the Master Therian? Yes. What does Therian mean? Great wild beast. Do these titles convey a fair impression of your practice and outlook on life? It depends on what they mean. The great wild beast and the B666, are they out of the apocalypse? It only means sunlight. 666 is the number of the sun. You can call me Little Sunshine. Crowley believed that the spiritual ages on Earth are determined by humanity's evolving level of consciousness, and that around the turn of the 20th century we did indeed enter a new age. A new age naturally means the end of the world, of the previous age. In Crowley's dramatic and colorful mind, the book of the Revelation of John the Divine provided the perfect narrative for this cosmic event. For Crowley, the whore of Babylon, the great dragon, and the beast 666 now represent perfectly wholesome spiritual characters who are instrumental in bringing about the birth of a new and eventually wonderful new age. Of course, not everyone will appreciate Crowley's point of view or his admiration of the number 666. But the 21st century is a kinder, gentler place for the memory of the wickedest man in the world. Even his native England, whose opinion of him in life was so terribly misguided, has now awakened to the fact that the man who called himself the Beast 666 was a national treasure. In 2002, the BBC conducted a poll of 30,000 Britons, asking them to vote for the person who was, in their opinion, the greatest Briton of all time. Named number 73 in the top 100, sandwiched between Henry V and Robert Bruce, Braveheart. Well, Braveheart's buddy, stands the famous poet, author, and philosopher Aleister Crowley. And then I'll end up with wrong number. The number 666 is strange and wonderful. But what would happen if we were to discover that there had been some kind of a mistake and that 666 was not the number St. John referred to in the 17th verse of the 13th chapter of his book? Would the nature of evil change? Would satanic rock bands have to change their tattoos? Maybe they'll have to. Recently, a 1,500-year-old papyrus manuscript was examined using new techniques to read the heretofore illegible script. The document is written in Greek and is the oldest known version of the book of the Revelation. The tiny fragment confirms what many scholars and churchmen have long suspected. The text actually reads, "Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 616. And that's the end of my contribution to Fate Magazine issue number 666. Tomorrow we'll pick up something else. I wrote an article which I enjoyed very much about Dr. John Dee and Enochian magic. Perhaps I'll read that tomorrow. Until then, as I opened, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will. Hope to see you tomorrow.